you ever have to tell somebody that something they didn't want to hear, mainly because you wouldn't want somebody to tell it to you? The Lord tells us, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Today, I'm going to break that commandment. I'm going to tell you what I would not want to hear. Brothers and sisters, this Sunday affords us an opportunity to study the gospel from a somewhat different perspective than what we're used to. Today we begin what the lectionary calls the Lucan jump. That is, we were reading Matthew before, now we are into the Gospel of St. Luke for the time being. And we read the first Gospel of the Sundays of Luke, which is that Gospel of the fishermen, but we also added today the Gospel which is attached to the feast of St. Cariton. St. Cariton was a 2nd century confessor of the church who went on to establish some of the first monasteries in the church, particularly in the Holy Land. And so, not surprisingly, the gospel related to a monastic is filled with the very strong calls to renunciation and to repentance. And that is what we heard as well in Luke 6. Now, the portion that we read from Luke 6 marks the beginning of what is often called the Sermon on the Plain. You may not have heard of the Sermon on the Plain, but I'm sure you've heard of the Sermon on the Mount. And that's in Matthew 5 through 7. But today we have the Sermon on the Plain. The two are very similar. In fact, probably referred to the same event. It's probably not very likely that there were two separate events at the time, unless he was giving the same sermon over the course of several weeks, the same teaching. Simply put, in Luke it says Jesus went up to the mountain to pray, then came down to be with the people who were on a level stretch of ground, which makes sense. They wouldn't all be clinging to the side of the cliff. The Gospel of Matthew says he was with them, and then when he saw how many there were, he kind of went up a little bit on the mountain to preach to them. So in both Gospels, it's clear there was a multitude at some point on a flat place next to a mountain. So call it what you will, it's basically the same event. But the more interesting differences between the two are much deeper than that. And they have everything to do with how the evangelists took that message that Jesus had that day and how he laid out a foundation of teaching. The portion that we see today mirrors the Beatitudes from Matthew 5. It includes its own Beatitudes, so to speak. And next Sunday, we'll look at the second part of that Sermon on the Plain, which is our regular reading for Sunday. Now, you probably already know what the Beatitudes are, because you've heard them every Sunday. It's the third antiphon that we sing, the third hymn. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. What we see today is a different set. In Matthew, there are basically 10 statements that make up the Beatitudes. There are 9, blessed are you, plus the final, rejoice and be glad. And that makes 10. And the reason that we count the last one to make 10 is because the Beatitudes reflect the New Testament version of the Old Testament law. The 10 Commandments gave us a list of things pretty much that are what we should not do. Thou shalt not. The Beatitudes give us an image of if you don't do those things and you live the spirit of the law, not just the letter, but if you lived out the spirit of the law, this is what your life will look like. These are the blessings that you will receive. And that's how it's laid out in Matthew. And that's appropriate because Matthew is trying to lay out the Sermon on the Mount as kind of a new Torah. Not a new law per se, but a full explanation of what the whole point of the law was in the first place. The law of righteousness, the life of righteousness. Now Luke is much simpler. Luke only has 4 statements, and you can add 1 for rejoice, 4 blessings, and 1 commandment to rejoice. But then it's followed with 4 woes. Woes are the opposites of blessings. They're not exactly curses, but they are the statement of what will happen to you if you don't live that life of the Spirit, if you don't follow those commandments. So we read, he lifted up his eyes towards his disciples and said, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day, and leap for joy, for indeed your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner their fathers did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich," is the second part which we didn't hear, "for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets." Note the difference between Matthew and Luke. Luke is much less open to possibilities. There's much less wiggle room in Luke. Luke is very black and white. Blessed are you who are poor, not poor in spirit, whatever that may mean. Blessed are you who hunger, without adding, and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are you who weep, for you shall laugh. It's much starker of a contrast than for you shall be comforted. And there's no mention of meekness or mercy or peacemaking. It is very stark. So this is, in these Beatitudes, this is frankly the Jesus that is well known and well loved by the liberation theologian and the leftists. They like this kind of edgy Jesus. Blessed are you when men hate you and exclude you and cast you out, for in like manner their fathers did to the prophets. That final phrase, though, establishes the key difference between Matthew and Luke. You see, in Matthew, the intended audience is the educated Pharisee, the educated Jew who understands the Torah, who looks to Moses for his source of inspiration. And so Matthew lays out the case of Jesus as being the fulfillment of the law, supreme and superior to Moses. And yes, while it challenges the hypocrisy of the Pharisee, it doesn't necessarily challenge the intrinsic righteousness of the party, if you will, the Pharisaical way. He calls the Pharisee to a higher standard. It appeals to the sensibility of the conscientious Jew, the good Jew. But in Luke, the audience is somewhat different. Luke speaks more directly to those who are already dispossessed. It's not trying to convince people who are religious but need to be better at it. It's appealing to those who are already suffering, those who are poor, those who are weak. It speaks the most about women. It speaks the most about those who are on the bottom of society. And it also speaks to the Gentiles very well, those who are completely considered unclean. It speaks not to those who have suffered from the Roman persecution on the legitimate Jewish state, but rather the legitimately persecuted people under the corrupt Jewish authorities. Because they were collaborating with the Romans, but even before that, they were seeking their own gain, they were abusing. So you see when it says, "For so did their fathers did to the prophets," it's not talking about the Romans or the Greeks or the Persians, it's talking about the evil kings and the evil powers within Judea. Thus the phrase, "Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you, when they cast you out." This was the punishment that the Pharisees pronounced on those that they deemed not good enough to be part of their club. So here Jesus in Luke is not so much like a second Moses, but more like a second Jeremiah. a second Isaiah, a second prophet, a second Elijah, who is chastising the powers that be, and the comfortable acceptance of the situation within his own countrymen. The woes that follow, therefore, are very much in that tradition, and further send home the message of the gospel that the kingdom does not belong to those who are glorious upon the earth. Woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. It's a direct accusation against the corruption within his own country. So it is good for us, brothers and sisters, even though we might not want to hear it, and even though it might make us uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable. I didn't want to preach you this. I like a much more positive message. But it's good for us, and that's a positive thing, to hear this version of the Beatitudes. We may be tempted to take the gospel with a little less salt if we only stick with the Beatitudes of Matthew. Like I said, Luke does not give us very much wiggle room for self-indulgence or self-righteousness. And when we hear the blessings reversed in the form of those woes, how can our consciences not be troubled? How can we not begin to feel discomfort? How many of us, like the disciples, heard when the Lord spoke of the camel going through the eye of the needle, also wondered, who then can be saved? Meaning, how can I be saved? And yet, just when we might expect Jesus, at this moment in the Gospel of Luke, to call, to rise up the people of God and take back what is theirs, to beat their plowshares into swords, and to go throw down the powers that be, and usher in the kingdom, and occupy Jerusalem and Rome and to the ends of the earth. He instead steps up his message and preaches what may be the most radical message of the gospel yet. But I say to you, he says in verse 27, I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. Matthew's a little bit softer when he speaks of these things in the Sermon on the Mount. To give without asking for return. This is if they take it from you, don't even ask for it back. So, what? How do we take this in the light of what he just said? What about all of our energy now? What about our marches and our demands and our missiles? What about our sanctions and our referendums and our assassinations and our glorious campaigns? What about them? The Lord said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who spitefully use you. Brothers and sisters, if we follow the gospel, there is no guarantee that the world will become a better place. I just want to make that clear. We will make our own sphere of influence a better place, because we will bring peace and mercy and meekness and justice and kindness and love wherever we go if we live the gospel. But the world as a whole will go on much as it always has. Most likely, it will not get better. The chances of that happening, I think, have come and gone. We had our opportunity. There is no utopia. There never will be. The shining city on the hill cannot be found with Google Maps. Jesus Christ did not die on the cross for anyone's country club Christianity or to restore the kingdom of heaven. as an earthly paradise or state. He died and rose again for a simple purpose: to destroy the power of the ruler of this present darkness, the rulers of this world, the principalities, powers, and authorities of this fallen world. And we are fools to think if any of those are actually human. They belong to the heavenly places, and they are demonic. He came to destroy the devil and his works, because for so long as the devil, death, and sin reign within us, there will be no justice, there will be no peace, there will be no love. So he came to destroy the one who seduces and enslaves us with the empty promises of riches and pleasures in this very temporary life. So if we are willing to hear, as he says, for those who hear, we are willing to hear it and listen and believe and learn this and align ourselves and our interests with the poor, the hungry, the weeping, the excluded, the cast out, and the hated, we will know the blessings. We will live the Beatitudes. We will know the eternal kingdom which stands all time. But if we ignore that and continue to pat ourselves on the back and satisfy ourselves with the good things of this earth, food and laughter and riches and acclaim, there is a promise that he has given for us. And it is one word: woe. Brothers and sisters, let us start again today. Let us love our enemies. Let us do good to those who do evil. Let us give without expecting anything in return. And let us not complain when the world does wrong to us. Try it. Live it. Walk in the faith. And see what happens. This is the message of Jesus Christ. Let us follow. Christ is among us.